Runners, today we're talking about icing, and I couldn't think of a better person to explore this controversial subject and why it may not work than Dr. Kelly Starrett. I took the scooter over, and we are over at their office at the R.I.C.E State, and we are going to get into it. So stick around for a good conversation to understand why icing doesn't work and what you should be doing instead.
All about that scooter life, bro.
All about that scooter life.
What's that?
Kelly, what did you just put in my eyes?
Not sure. It's some kind of combination between like naphtha, like mothballs, and like diesel. It comes from Japan though, so it's good.
All right, what's up guys? Coach Nate here with the Run Experience with Dr. Kelly Starrett of the R.I.C.E State.
TRE meets TRS.
There we go, right? So excited to bring you here because I have a question. I get a lot of questions about icing running injuries. It's something that is just pervasive among runners. I know that I've done it in the past. In fact, I had an experience a couple years ago where I ran the Spartan Race World Championships up in Tahoe. 9 miles into this gnarly 14-mile day, I dropped off an obstacle, landed in the water, turned my ankle, hobbled on it for the next 5 or 6 miles, and then afterwards...
Wait, you kept going?
Kept going, man. I was on top of the mountain. I
That's
didn't
what
get
you
down
do.
the damn
I know,
thing.
and it's amazing. You did keep going. Like nothing bad. Like you're like, hey, I turned my ankle, but you kept moving, right? What happened when you stopped moving?
It felt terrible.
Like what do you mean? Like what happened? Because you're moving on it. You're like, oh, clearly I've sprained my ankle. But then you stop moving, and then what happened?
It started to swell and stiffen. Yeah. So I went back to your house because I was staying up with you up in Squaw and Tahoe that night, and I didn't really know what to do. And you had me do a few things, but you didn't have me reach for any ice.
Yeah, we were using that for the margaritas.
That's true.
Yes, true. So I guess what we want to think about is, we oftentimes have thought, hey, I've injured something, let me put some ice on it. Okay. So if what we've said is, hey, I have swelling, I'm going to control the swelling with the icing. And certainly slowing down the reactivity of the tissues with ice sort of makes sense, right? Because you're like, okay, it's swelling, that's a problem. I'll just turn the hose off and see if I can stop the swelling from coming in. Well,
because there's something about managing the swelling that seemed to be the most important thing.
That's right, because the swelling is clearly, when a joint is swollen, it's not going to heal very well. The tissues are not going to be able to knit down, so that's a problem. All that pressure can cause a lot of discomfort, right? It's just pushing and pushing, like your ankle's throbbing. And then you also really just sort of, the whole system doesn't know where it is in space. So it's not a very good system because it's all kind of bloated, right? So if we think about trying to manage swelling, the real question is, do I want to turn off the hose? Because that swelling mechanism is the mechanism by which my body's healing itself, right?
So that's a really interesting thing, right? Because at least I was under the impression that anytime my body swelled or something, it was bad, I was trying to get that swelling down as quickly as possible. Is that the full truth?
Well, I think what we want to be thinking of is, okay, is swelling a mistake? And it's not a mistake. We know that happens anytime. Have you ever had a paper cut and your finger swells?
Yeah.
Because of the paper cut. So
it's your body's natural response.
That's right. And what's doing is it's bringing in all the cells, all the tissues that it needs to rebuild, to repair, to take the garbage and encapsulate and get it out, right?
Which is why it's starting to fill up.
So let's think about, let's pan back for a second. And that if we look at our 2.5 million year evolutionary selves, and even up until really 10,000 years ago, we're the same people we were 10,000 years ago. Really, I'm a little fatter, your femur's a little longer, or vice versa, I can't remember which. But the idea here is, we have been a movement-based people. Like that's why we have nervous systems, to move through the environment. So we have a nervous system that allows us to perceive change and sense change and then move through the environment. So we can feed ourselves, toilet, get enough ground, carry things back to the right? Interestingly, in 2.5 million years of evolution, our bodies built the recovery system into the muscular system.
Man, those humans who didn't have freezers and ice packs, they must have been screwed.
I don't know how we're here, right? And God forbid you live in a warm place, right? But I think what's interesting is, look at the design of the human being, is that the number one thing that we knew we're always going to do is we're always going to move a little bit. And so what ends up happening is that lymphatic system, which is the system in which we move congestion and swelling away from the body, is all muscular based. So if I don't move, I don't really have a mechanism to eject the lymph through the system. It's a bunch of one-way valves in these tubes to get that out. So what ends up happening is if I'm static and not moving, I'm not contracting any muscles. And you can relate to this if you've ever been on an airplane before. You get cankles, right? Have you ever had your feet swollen? Well,
That's the worst.
What's that about? Well, you're not moving your calves, and subsequently what ends up happening
that
is...
blood starts to pool on the
But not
bottom.
even blood, just think of congestion, just the lymph, the drainage, right? And especially our runners or people who compete where we go to and do a race and then jump on the airplane the next day, right? Or that evening, you've done that before, and you get home and you're like, what's going on? You feel stiff, your tissues are swollen and congested. So if we go back then and say, okay, part of the mechanism that allows human beings to move lymph, to decongest our normal tissues, is this movement system. So I've had an injury to the system. I get hyper swelling, hyper fluids in the area. And the real question is, does getting cold help that or not? Does that modulate that system or not? So we know, so without getting into all the kind of complexity of the biochemistry, let's say that when we are trying to control something with cooling, what we're really trying to do is limit the amount of healing that can happen.
We're like slowing that process down.
Right. And that is going to work, and then you're going to warm back up and start healing again, right? So, but one of the...
really, if you ice it, you're basically saying you're delaying your body's natural response. It doesn't really turn it off.
No.
It just prolongs this whole experience.
But you can blunt it during a really cute window, because it doesn't just heal and heal. It launches this response, and then that response has been called. And one of the things we know, for example, is that we used to take ibuprofen running. Do you remember that old model? Like, I'm going for a run.
It still happens. Some of you guys still do.
I should take some ibuprofen before I go run.
They do it before a race,
right?
before a long
I don't want to
run.
feel any pain, God forbid. Well, what's interesting is we know that taking non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, like ibuprofen, like aspirin, like Aleve, these things actually limit healing of soft tissues and bone growth. So people don't actually like to prescribe them afterwards.
It's a gnarly trade right there.
Well, you're going to be out of pain, but we're not going to heal. And what happens is we are, and there's been some great studies, like some guys in the Australian Army sprained ankles really bad. And they give these guys big doses of ibuprofen, just like every other athlete in the 80s and 90s. And then those guys weren't back in the field faster than the people who didn't use ibuprofen, but they had weird ankle instability for the rest of their lives. Their ankles never really healed. And because those ligaments didn't heal, because what do? They cut the connection between the circulating stem cells and the injury site. So what we don't want to do is we don't want to say, hey, let's limit our body's ability to heal. But what we also want to do is make sure that you can have a strategy to get rid of the swelling, right? Because this is the key. Because if the swelling is a problem, it's not a mistake, but my failure to move it out is a problem.
Right. So what I'm hearing from this is that we don't necessarily want to stop the swelling with ice or anti-inflammatory. It needs to get going again later, and it will delay that process. And then if I'm doing NSAIDs, that can just
cut the connection.
Further
it just won't heal. My brain's like, oh, fine, we'll just suppress this inflammatory response, and we'll just pretend like that's it. What's interesting though is that there is some good research that when you get something really cold, you actually cut the connection between the brain and the tissues, right? That's called numbing. Well, those lymphatics actually become porous. Whatever was sequestrated into the lymphatic system that's going to get shuttled out, the swelling, gets pushed back into the interstitial tissue. And so what you've done is put a secondary tissue flush back into the system. So you're on your way of getting this stuff out of the area.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're like, let's freeze it up. And then all that tissue that was on its way out, it's like, it goes back. So now you've got the secondary tissue, right? So you're swelling, and then the stuff that you're going out, you're like, just take all the dirty clothes, scatter them around the room, right? So what we want to say is, okay, maybe that's not the best. In fact, very little research to support the use of ice. So what we know is ice is a powerful analgesic, right? I can get out of pain by getting really cold. Don't believe me? Let's get into the ice bath. And I guarantee you, at some point, you'll be like, I can't feel my body. I'm like, perfect!
Yeah.
That's perfect! But what we know is, and your experience told us, that if I kept moving, I can manage the swelling, right? Because that movement was allowing you to stay ahead of the swelling process.
That movement was that lymphatic
Getting
pump.
the lymph out. That's all you're doing. So we can do that in a whole bunch of different ways. The first way is through easy motion. So could you get on a bike and just spin, right? Can you decongest? So the more we can get muscle contraction in a system, the more likely we are to get that out. And you can do that any way you want. You could go for easy walk. You can wiggle your toes like you're on an airplane. You know, they tell you to wiggle your toes and just move your calves. So there's a lot of ways for us to do that. One of the things that we know is that the tissues...
So if you're dealing with a running injury, the worst thing to do is just sit like a lump on the couch.
Oh, that would be basically the very bottom. And then if you could ice it on top of that, right? Because what I'm not doing is I'm not helping my body to heal. And we know we need as much pain-free motion as we can get. Now, there are lots of devices that can give us muscle contraction, right? We can use an exterior device, which is basically just movement without motion, right? So if I just came in and just like, I just want you to flex like this a couple times a second for the next hour or so, you can do that. And that's just why, have you ever seen someone have a shoulder surgery?
Yes.
Did they give you that ball to squeeze?
Uh-huh.
What's that ball about?
Just about keeping things moving.
Yes. So by squeezing, you're now contracting the forearm, which is causing the system to pump out the decongestion, right? That's what it's not about maintaining strength in your shoulder by moving your hand.
Yeah.
It's about keeping movement in the system. So even just wiggling your toes as much as you could if you had to lay down, that would be a big deal, right? What we know though is that even just high levels of intermittent compression can make a big difference. So the Voodoo flossing that we did with you is that we took that ankle, and what we did was we just compressed it and then had you move. And then we popped it off and then we compressed it, and we just kept pushing things up the chain, which is classic lymphatic drainage, like lymphatic therapy, where someone would try to mechanically push up instead of your muscles doing the work. Does that make sense?
Love it. I totally love it.
So what we're thinking is, how can I maintain as much movement as possible? And let me ask you this. In TRE, if people do a brutal run, do you help them, you just tell them to take the next days off and don't move? Day after that?
No, they're usually doing some sort of like body weight strength work or a little bit of mobility work, or they're cross training and they're getting on a bike.
Why would we keep people moving? So let's look at the natural response to some kind of big effort is the trauma, and we'll put it into quotation marks, adaptation response of disrupted homeostasis, and by moving, I'm going to feel better. Well, let's just expand that movement language to say, hey, look, when I've sprained my ankle, let's keep moving. Let's look at that as the same thing as like I did 17 miles of downhill and my quads are blown, right?
Right.
You're going to get the same response, but somehow because it's the ankle, we think, and you may have to baby it and hobble around, but I want you to get as much motion in as you can. I'm not saying go run on it, but could you get into a pool? Can you get pressure on it? Like, what are the things I can do?
There's a little common sense element to this, but you're really trying to empower the mover and the runner to like keep moving and not just think that waiting and doing nothing is the best course.
Well, and particularly when it's around an ankle, it's a problem because the ankle is as far away from the heart as we can get, and it's the bottom of the gravity well. So the whole body is trying to push blood into your feet and congestion into your feet.
Yeah, it's harder to get it up.
And so if you're swollen, and then you also have this band of connective tissue around your ankle called the retinaculum. So imagine all of your muscles running into your calf, and then they go around through this band. And if you didn't have it, if you'd flex your calf, like it would go from your big toe, the muscles, it would just be weird, right? Bing! You would just see like the puppet would explode. But instead, you have these dainty little beautiful calves. So what ends up happening is all those tendons and ligaments, tendons particularly, run underneath this band of connective tissue called the retinaculum. So that thing though acts like a really tight sock. And so if you have swelling in the foot, it's actually harder because that space is so small at the ankle. So should you elevate? Yes. Elevation can make a big difference, especially elevation movement. But when I mean elevate, I mean you're on your back and your foot is straight up
feet up against the wall.
I would say, hey, don't put super tight compression on it all the time. Moderate compression can make a difference because we still want to get the garbage out and the groceries in. So if I just compressed it, right, then I might not be able to get all the garbage out and the groceries in. But high-level compression, like with intermittent wrapping, or you jumped in some
So you have a
boots.
moment where you're allowing kind of both things to happen.
Yes. So what we're saying is, hey, look, we want to get as much early motion as we can. We want to do our best to manage whatever swelling is on, and the best way to do that is movement, or more importantly, muscle contraction, right? That's the way. Elevation can work. Some low-level compression, like compression socks would be great, right? You can wear compression socks, keep that thing from just swelling up, there's no space, but get as much movement as you can. And suddenly what you'll find, and the reason we're saying this, is that you can run on that ankle faster. You will optimize your rate of healing, not wait around for this swollen ankle. Because when people come and see me and their ankles are still swollen weeks later and congested and their feet look distorted,
you can tell.
I can tell every single time. And I'm like, what have you been doing for this thing? And they're like, I don't know, Icing religiously.
Yeah.
I'm like, and how's it going for you? And they're like, it's terrible. I can't walk. It hurts. I can't
Meanwhile,
run.
you've been losing fitness mentally. You're not in a good spot.
So
you're not able to play with your friends.
Let me just be clear. The reason we treat this way is that we have better outcomes. Our athletes are back on the field faster. They're running faster. They have better healing times, right? Everything, when we don't ice, is accelerated. We want to give people management for pain. Tylenol is very powerful.
Yeah. So what are some of your favorite toys? You've made references to some of these things, but not everyone knows what these are. So what's a Voodoo floss band?
So a Voodoo floss band is just a simple, long, stretchy band that if you go onto Amazon and type in Voodoo floss, you'll see all of the Voodoo floss options.
You took a bunch of old bike tires.
Bike tires work great. And the idea is that we're just going to get a good stretch, and we're just going to wrap it up like a mummy and try to push that fluid out, and then keep it on for a minute or two, right? So let's keep that compression on. So
look at this.
This is a Voodoo band. Looks like an open, it's thin and stretchy. And what we're going to do is we just get some high-level compression. We say 50% tension in the system. So 100% tension, 50% tension. Overlap it a little bit, and don't be precious. Squeeze it up towards the heart.
Yeah.
Then, so if we were wrapping this on, right, and let's say that, this is the issue, what we're going to do is get it started, and then I'm just going to wrap a little bit. And we keep and travel with these all the time.
They really are great. I keep one in my backpack, and I can just kind of take it everywhere with me. I love this because you can really wrap it. Woo, that is tight.
So now
you can wrap any body part.
That's right. So what's amazing now is
maybe
that
not the face.
It's tight, and you can see that theoretically we're limiting how much blood flow is coming in.
Oh man,
but our goal
close.
is to squeeze this down. And the second you want to get it off, a minute or two, then we just pop it off.
Take it
on
off.
the ankle.
Yeah.
And what we see is that we can reduce these ankles from huge back down to almost nothing with repeated. So we try to floss 10 times a day gets you a C, is what we tell people.
I love it. So if you're dealing with knee issues, your IT band, your quads, your hamstrings, you can wrap your thighs. Any calf or shin issue you can hit there.
So if we think that there's a congestion issue, or hey, I may have a tissue that's been overworked, which is very common in our training experience, because sometimes as modern people, we don't do a great job of managing our adaptation, right?
Yeah.
The reason we run hard to train is so that we can bring dinner back? No, it's so that we can heal and adapt from that training response and get faster.
Right.
But sometimes we have jobs, or we sit in a car, or
emails are real, man. They won't type themselves.
That's right. And so sometimes we don't fully adapt to the stimulus. And so the tissues get a little bit behind, or they get overworked because I feel zealous and I have an ego and I'm going to go crush it with my friends. And then what's my strategy? And our strategy first is saying, hey, let's look at the environment. And in not addressing this tissue environment is really a big loss of potential. So if you like the Intermittent boots, right? Those are those air boots that squeeze.
Oh, those are great.
Those are great. You get to lay there, they compress, they push out, right? That's really great. Blood flow restriction is another way to hyper-perfuse tissues. Compression pants, compression socks make a difference in terms of managing the load if I'm not going to be moving.
And e-stim devices?
Yeah, well, the NMES stuff, neuromuscular electric stimulation, and there's a lot of those devices out there. We have a company we work with, but more importantly, all it does is any of these devices that facilitates a muscle contraction means that I can theoretically be moving without being tired. I don't actually have to ride the bike for an hour. We have a coach at our gym Yasmin, who loves to just get on the bike and she just spins. And I kid around because she's just moving at like a glacial pace. And I'm like, hey, you're not getting any work done here. You're doing it 8 watts. She's like, I'm recovering. And just that motion is the same thing as going for a walk, if I could do it, the same thing of going for a swim to decongest. How can we get this non-fatiguing movement in? So NMES is one of the tools that we use.
I love it. So Kelly, thank you so much for this. We'll link to a bunch of Kelly's favorite recovery tools down in the description below. And if you want to keep watching, well, Kelly and I did a great video on how to fix your feet. We got into a whole bunch of fun stuff, and you can go ahead and watch that right over here on the shoulder. Thanks, Kelly.